It's 8:54. It's time for us to turn our attention to rugby. Keith Wood is with us. Keith, good morning to you.
Good morning. How are you? I was just laughing over your virtual insanity and wondering whether that ages you, actually, and whether you've ever worn those odd hats. That was the first thought that came to my head this morning.
There you go. It ages all of us. Owen hasn't a clue what we're talking about.
No, of course he doesn't.
We're talking about Jamiroquai.
Yeah, do you remember?
Yeah. Who did I see? Oh, there was someone in Eurovision actually the last day. Was it the winner? Was it the winner of Eurovision had a Jamiroquai hat on? I don't know.
I think that kind of places you in a different position altogether, that you're watching Eurovision, but that's okay, Owen, I suppose.
Why does it turn you off, Keith? I would have had you down as a massive Eurovision fan.
I'm not a Eurovision fan. The only joy of Eurovision back in the day was listening to Terry Wogan absolutely taking the mickey out of everybody. But ever since then, no, that's gone. That's gone for me.
A good Munster man. But speaking of Europe, see what I did there? Leinster's performance at the weekend was as good as we've ever seen. Obviously, they have to get the job done for us to be able to fully enjoy it. But while the final is still to be decided, we should enjoy it because it was a level of excellence which we've rarely seen in Irish rugby, if ever.
Yeah, I think that's a cracking summation for it, and it's not wanting to put the moxers on it, and that they don't kind of go there and get to actually hold the trophy at the end of it. But their performances over the last number of weeks have been pretty extraordinary. They manage their players really, really well, and that's used as a criticism from the British teams and the French teams, which I consider to be one of the greatest compliments we can get to the Irish system and to Leinster in particular. But they looked in control from start to finish, and to watch a team like Toulouse, and of course they were tired from the previous week, but that wouldn't count until maybe the last 10 or 15 minutes of the first half, and maybe the last half an hour of the second half. But for the rest of it, it was the manner in which Leinster were playing. Look, I was reflecting on it for a couple of things. One, I was being particularly protective of Johnny Sexton 2 or 3 years ago, and maybe protective of the number 10 jersey in Ireland, knowing that we weren't getting players through the system, that we were having some players there, but none of them were able to oust him. And I would have said 2 or 3 years ago, he was at risk of getting smashed and knocked out of all kilter, if we're honest. But the manner in which both Ireland and Leinster play he's incredibly well protected. And for me, he played a directing role for all the time he was on the pitch of such a standard the other day that it looked as if he just turned back time. And he's not as fast as he used to be, but it was a commanding performance. I thought he was brilliant. I thought he deserved whatever plaudit he got. And actually, if Ireland and Leinster are able to continue to play in that fashion and protect him, we will get him to the World Cup. And not just that. And my fear was he'd get to the World Cup, but wouldn't be able to deliver. At the moment, he's delivering at the highest standard. So for that alone, it was wonderful. But then everybody else, there weren't cameos. Every other player on the field stood up. Just great.
A quick question on Sexton while you bring it up, right? The announcement during the week of the 2 midweek games against the New Zealand Maoris, very interesting. It means that those 5 games now in New Zealand offer both the opportunity for a historic victory on New Zealand soil of one of the 3 tests, but also an opportunity to develop some players. So I suspect, initially I thought that maybe they won't bring some of those frontline players and they'll bring a big squad, but it'll be kind of, slightly diluted first choice. Now I feel like they might just bring this massive squad where they do like 40 players or more, and it divides into 2, and there's a midweek test and there's a test series, but actually everybody gets to work and understand exactly what it's like. And in that context, Sexton probably does go on the tour. Maybe even Cian Healy goes on the tour. Like players who you thought, well, they'll just keep them at home to make sure that they get as long out of them as possible. But actually the benefit of having those 2 extra matches, it just changes the whole tone of things for me.
Well, it does if the squad is huge, and it means the RFU are going to dig deep to make certain they can bring that number of players. But it makes a huge difference. I'm a huge fan of midweek matches, and in times when the level wasn't at that standard, or the hits weren't at that standard. You could get away with doing it with one squad. My dad actually went on a Lions tour that had 33 matches, and which just is kind of crazy to think of. You'd have a 33 match tour, but I know those things have changed since, obviously. But the midweek matches are brilliant to get a sense of the history of rugby, and that it's a bit more than a game. And when you go down to New Zealand, you're going to get a fairly high insight into that. But we do need to blood players, and it isn't blood them to give them a cap. It's to blood them to get them used to different types of pressure all the time. And what we have seen over the last few weeks, some people haven't reacted as well under pressure, but now they've learned from that. So those failures, if you want to call them that, are the areas where you learn from most. But the opportunity to be exposed against fast-running, very hard, very physical teams, having to perform and turn up every couple of days, that gives you a huge sense of togetherness for the squad. So I don't know if they'd have it as two separate squads, and I hope there'd be some level of interactivity to it. I'd go back to something that Donal Lenihan did in 1989 on the Lions tour, and they're the only real comparators to having midweek matches at the moment. And he captained the midweek team, and the onus that was on him was he had to deliver for the midweek team so that they could put pressure on the team that was playing on the Saturday, and that every player had to play very well, because there was a string of players behind them who were going to take their place if they didn't play well. That's a great opportunity for the senior and the junior players that go out onto that tour, because you're going to be in a position where if there's an injury, you're in. So you're focused all the time. And for me, it's the first time we've had this big play on getting it right for 18 months' time. I think that's pretty impressive.
To go back to Leinster at the weekend, and that tangent aside, are there any issues that you see from that game and from La Rochelle last year that persist, or is it a different test that Leinster will pose for O'Gara and his brains trust and the players on the field?
Look, I think an awful lot of it comes down. The one weakness where Leinster were last week was at scrum time. If there was any change or if there was any lack of concentration at any stage. And Toulouse went for certain scrums. They didn't go for all of them. La Rochelle, I think, would do something similar. I thought it was a very complete performance, because it looked as if Leinster were playing at a high level of aggression. I'm surprised they didn't target DuPont as much as Munster did. They did a couple of times, but not anywhere near as much as Munster did. They just played their own game, and it's a great sense of confidence in that, to say, yeah, they did something really well, but actually we do things differently. And for me, there was a fluidity in it. The concentration had to be at 100%. My view against Leicester the week previously was their concentration was excellent for about 25 minutes, and then it didn't need to be. And I thought they emotionally took their foot off the pedal a little. And when that happens, not every pass sticks, and a whole variety of different things can go wrong. They still had enough, and always knew they had enough to go up and win. It looked like they felt on Saturday that they had to play at that level of accuracy throughout. And I mean, I think they left a few scores behind them. But I always think they're going to, in the manner in which they play, because they are playing percentages, but they are taking a risk as well. And I think Leinster a few years ago were playing percentages incredibly well and better than anybody else, and then they were stopped. They have to take the risks, and with that, some tries won't be scored, some mistakes will be made. But for me, it was a complete performance.
And some tries will probably be scored at the other end as well. That kind of seem like they're out of the blue, especially when you're up against some of the world's best players. I presume that they've sat down and analysed that risk-reward setup and said, this is worth it because of the scores that we're going to get.
I think so too, but also Toulouse got a breakaway try. They didn't look like scoring for 20 minutes, so Leinster were in pretty much total control of the game. I like the performances of some of the players as well. I think different players are leading. Van der Fleer is is just reaching unbelievable levels of performance. James Lowe is having an impact pretty much every single time he gets a chance. Gibson Park is unrecognisable to 12 months ago. It's I think a telling element for coaches out there that sometimes you need to give players their head and give them the confidence to play. And actually, if you don't get picked, you tend not to play to performance. And sometimes when you get the opportunity, if you take it, he grows week on week. And I just thought he was phenomenal. And I think it takes a lot of pressure off Johnny Sexton as well, that there is another player that's making a whole array of decisions at different times in the game, that it doesn't just sit on one person. And I think that's been part of that change to Leinster.
Can we just take a moment to worship at the altar of the left boot of James Lowe? Like, Jesus Christ, that thing's massive.
There's a Gary Larson cartoon, so it's for a guy doing arm wrestling, and he loses with his right arm, and he says, well, why don't we try with the left? And you can see his left arm is in shadow, and his left arm is about 5 times the size of the right arm. Well, that's kind of similar to James Lowe's boot. When he does connect with it, it's an incredible relieving kick. I remember mentioning a long time ago David Campese in his last 2 years with Australia. He lost his pace entirely. I mean, it was amazing. He still had a step, but it was getting him into trouble rather than out of trouble. But he developed a skill. He just practiced because he still wanted to play. And he could kick a spiral with his left leg down the full distance and stay within the tram lines. He could kick it 60 yards down the field. He could do the same with his right. And it became an incredible and potent relieving tool to have if they were under huge pressure. And we're seeing that with James Lowe. He's scoring tries, but he is the go-to guy to hose the ball down the middle of the field. So, at different times, they're not under any pressure because they know they can kick it 60 yards.
The job that O'Gara has done is probably something that we take a little bit for granted because we talk to him all the time, and at the same time we don't have a bunch of Irish coaches who have gone abroad and reached the very top level as consistently as he has done. We have a few, right? Obviously, Conor O'Shea, Mark McCall, they've put together great careers, but not as quickly as this. Like he's still looks like he could come on and kick some of those penalties his half is missing. It's a phenomenal achievement for him at this early juncture of his career.
Absolutely, and he still wears his bitterness incredibly comfortably. He's angry with everybody. He's still bitching and moaning whenever he gets a chance, as if that's a change from anything he's ever had. I remember saying it when he went down to he went to France first. I thought, God, that's an interesting move for him. That's going to be tough. Then he went down to New Zealand, and that's unbelievably rare. And we'll find this out during the summer, but the Kiwis don't particularly care about anybody else. It's their way is right, and it's the best way, and they have the best system, and they're a bit dismissive of most. But I can tell you, so having spoken to some of the players, that the esteem under which Raj was dealt with by players and management alike, and fans, which is an interesting one to turn over down in New Zealand. They just liked the different input, and he was considered a player with a high degree of excellence. He was a coach that they wanted to listen to because he thought of things differently. He had a good emotional sense of things, which in a lot of cases New Zealand try not to do. But they liked that difference. And he learned an awful lot from it. That's a very difficult, unworn path to go down to New Zealand and then to come back up and get a chance and sit in the shadow last year and then have to do it on his own this year. Like, that's a very fast elevation. I think he's worn it well in his bitchy comments, in his arguments with other coaches on the sideline, in his drive for success. I think he's done an extraordinary job. And it's quite interesting. We often talk about budgets and different things like that. He's gone to a club that is rooted in the community. So I think that's probably a very good fit for Raj. But he's his own man doing his own thing. And I think it's phenomenal to watch. And you mentioned Mark McCall. Mark McCall has done that with Saracens. He's been there for a huge period of time. Conor O'Shea has done it in his way as well. It's quite public the way Rog has done it. And Saracens have a different structure actually for Mark McCall. So it isn't really all about Mark McCall. It kind of is all about Rog. And I don't mean that it's not all about Rog, but it's all about Rog in La Rochelle.
It's on his shoulders, yeah.
It's on his shoulders, and the structures that are there are about promoting the coach to be the hero or the fall guy. That's a really tough place to be. So, look, I think he's done an incredible job. I thought he got out of jail at the weekend. Ohio West, he scored the try at the end, but he put the team under huge pressure, missing those penalties. And those penalties need to go over in those matches. And for them to do well against Leinster will require every single opportunity taken. And I love the idea of keeping the ball, that style that they have. But I want them to look inside to who they're passing to. There must have been 10 passes inside with no look passes that went to their opponents. And there requires a bit more discipline required for that, only because Leinster will exploit that entirely. So I think he's done an extraordinary job. Whether they're going to be good enough to beat Leinster, in my mind, you can't look away from Leinster being champions. The only plus for Rog is that it's not away, and there is that psyche, which is extraordinary. And I actually think it helped La Rochelle to not be playing in Racing's ground, because it just affects the French teams. There should be a study done on it. Why is it that's the case? Why is there? It's like an imposter syndrome. Once you play away from home, when you really shouldn't be there, you shouldn't win. But down in Marseille, it's an incredible place. One of the great places to watch rugby, one of the great cities, and the enjoyment that you're going to have beforehand. Like, that's some trip for Leinster fans to go down to see. So that's the only thing I would say. That I don't think they'll be as tight as they were in the semi-final.
All right, Keith, we'll leave it there for now. We'll obviously preview that final in plenty of time. Thanks a million. Cheers.
Brilliant. Cheers, lads.